Latin, you may have heard, is a dead language. And yet, it isn't too hard to find Latin in use across the Western world. In courtrooms, churches, hospitals, and even casual speech, the language pops up all over the place. So, is Latin really dead? For a language, dead means that the language is not natively spoken by any living person, not that it's not spoken by anyone. But by dead language standards, Latin is pretty vivacious, and it's used by different people for different reasons. Let's start with religion, more specifically, Christianity. The original language of Christianity was not Latin. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and the New Testament was written in Greek. But in the 4th century, the Romans decided that the language of the church should be Latin, because that's what they spoke. Latin became an important part of the religion, especially for the branch of Christianity called Roman Catholicism. Today, the Latin in most churches is pretty minimal, with words and phrases like Deus, Pax, Ave Maria, and Adeste Fidelis. Catholic church services were held solely in Latin until the 20th century, and it's still officially used by the Pope and other high-ranking members of the church in Vatican City, which is the home of Catholicism. But religion isn't the only place where the language has lingered. If you've ever spent time in a courtroom, you'll hear lots of legal terms that are in Latin. This is again thanks to the Romans, who went across Europe and created court systems that practiced law in Latin. In England, English didn't become the primary language of courtrooms until 1730, years after English became the dominant language of the country. But because the whole system of law had been created in Latin, the specific terms never went away, and you'll still hear lawyers talk about habeas corpus, ex post facto, pro bono, and more. So if you've ever thought a lawyer sounds like they're speaking another language, it's because they sometimes are. Now let's go to the world of science, where Latin is ever present. Up until the 18th century, scientific papers all around Europe would be written in Latin. And when we say scientific, we mean a lot more than just physics and math. Until the 19th century, science also included philosophy. As with law, the use of Latin in science is thanks to the Romans, spreading the idea that Latin is the language of knowledge. And while you don't need to be fluent in Latin to be a doctor anymore, you do need a good working knowledge of some Latin terms. Binomial nomenclature, for example, is the universal standard of naming creatures using Latin words, which is why a house cat is called Felis catus, and a dog is called Canis familiaris, and a potato is called Solanum tuberosum in scientific papers. There are 2 reasons why it's useful for scientific terms to be in Latin. First, Latin never changes, so there's no concern that the meaning of words will change over time. Second, it can be easier to communicate scientific thoughts across language. If you call a cat, that needs to be translated, but Felis catus does not. The same goes for all those complicated Latin medical terms. You wouldn't want the name for a deadly disease to get lost in translation. There are downsides, however. Latin, being the lingua franca of the Western scientific community, has made it historically biased toward the work of Europeans. Even beyond these fields, the Latin language can appear, whether you're reading philosophy or just telling a friend to carpe diem. Whether we consciously recognize it or not, Latin is a prestigious language, meaning that people in the Western world consider it to be more scholarly than other languages. But Latin was really never any different from any other language except for its connection to one of the most dominant empires in history. And in a very real sense, Latin never really died. The Latin we use today is a language preserved in amber, and it's no longer capable of change because it has no community of speakers. But historically, Latin broke apart and evolved into the Romance languages, including French, Portuguese, Italian, and others. And even though English isn't a Romance language, some studies find that almost 30% of English words come from the language. So even if you aren't speaking Latin, you're still using Latin-descended words like miracle, beautiful, and even language itself. Even without the use of Latin in religion, science, and the rest, the language would still survive through its descendants. Because unlike people, languages are not alive and then dead. They are forever evolving, forever changing into something else.